Welcome back to Hardcore Literature, your favourite book club. Deep dives into the greatest books ever written, provocative poems, evocative epics, and life-changing literary analyses. We don't just read the great books, we live them. Together we'll suck the marrow out of Shakespeare, Homer, Tolstoy, and many more. We'll relish the most moving art ever committed to the page and stage from every age. Join us and me, your host, Benjamin McAvoy, on the reading adventure of a lifetime with hardcore literature. Reading adventure of a lifetime is indeed correct. It's been a wild ride. You're listening to Hardcore Literature. I'm Benjamin McAvoy, and today I'm going to answer your bookish questions. Actually, answering your questions is one of the most fun aspects of doing the podcast and of running the book club. So if you've got any questions for me that you want to see on the podcast from here on out, maybe we'll do this as a feature at the beginning of each show, then please email me at ben@benjaminmcavoy.com. That's MCEVOY. I sent out an email blast just half an hour or so ago asking people for their questions, and I put a YouTube video up, a very quick one, just that's going to self-destruct in the next 20 minutes or so, asking people for some questions, basically. So if you haven't already subscribed to the YouTube channel, maybe go check it out. It's under my real name, which is Benjamin McAvoy. And let's get into the questions. We've got some good ones. Now, the first question that piqued my curiosity was, what do you think about the recent Guardian article about women conquering fiction? That sounds interesting. So, it's been a while since I've read The Guardian. Last year I read The Spectator, subscribed to The Spectator. I used to read The Guardian when I was younger, but I haven't read it in many years now. In fact, I try to stay away from most print journalism, most media, social or otherwise. But let's check it out. I'm going to look it up now and read it in real time, and I can give you my sincere feedback on that one, what I think about this recent Guardian article. So I've got the article up here. It's called How Women Conquered the World of Fiction. And this writer says most current prizes and bestsellers are more female-dominated than male, but is this cultural shift something to celebrate or rectify? The article begins in March. Vintage, one of the UK's largest literary fiction divisions, announced the 5 debut novelists it would be championing this year, and she lists them. All 5 are women, but you could be forgiven for not noticing it. So commonplace are female-dominated lists in 2021. Over the past 12 months, almost all of the buzz in fiction has been around young women. And she lists a huge list. Ask a novelist of any gender who they're reading, and they'll almost certainly mention one of, again, huge list. Now, can I just say that I don't actually recognise maybe little more than half of these names? Some I do, but most of them I don't. The energy, this writer says, as anyone in the publishing world will tell you, is with women. Well, can I just stop right here and just say that this has kind of been the case for a while now? I mean, when I was part of the writing community, it was a well-known thing that if you wanted a readership, a big one, if you wanted to make money, and if you were smart, to use James Patterson's phrasing, you'd write for women. You'd make that your prime reader, because women, especially with fiction, this is not the case with non-fiction, but specifically with fiction, that's all kinds of fiction, literary fiction, romance, pretty much all genres. There's a couple of pockets of different genres that are more male-centric, but more or less, it's women buying the books. If we can just be blanket and just say a blanket statement for a moment, women are buying most of the books. Women are listening to this show more than men. Now, it's almost 50-50. It's quite even. At the moment, my analytics are showing that a bit over 60% of the audience is female. When I first started, it was closer to 80-90%. So it's evened out a little bit. So that's interesting, and I'm proud of that, because it's not my aim to just have an echo chamber of people who look alike and talk alike and come from the same background. And that's what I really like about the book club, is the fact that without overtly talking about identity politics, we have procured a base of naturally and organically diverse readers, which I'm very proud of. So this article goes on and says, over the past 5 years, the Observer's annual debut novelist feature has showcased 44 writers, 33 of whom were female. You'll find similar ratios on prize shortlists. Men were missing among the recent names of nominees for the Costa First Novel Award. So the shortlisted authors over the past 5 years have been 75% female. She goes on to list all the awards and how basically women are taking them home. But not everyone in publishing sees it in such benign terms. Why is that lovely to see? A male publisher emailed me shortly after the list was announced. Can you imagine the opposite? A short list of 5 men and 1 woman, about which the chair says it's lovely to see men dominating the shortlist. Okay, right, so I'll pause here. It's a bit of a lengthy article, but it's interesting. I really resist identity politics. It leaves a very sour taste in my mouth to even have to talk about this, to even have to point it out, to even have to say, hey, this list is dominated by X or Y, this race, this gender, and then to make a moral judgment upon it. I really hope that one day we can live in a world where we are first and foremost judged on our aesthetic merit, and anything to do with our identity is incidental, neither a help nor a hindrance. Of course, identity is obviously wrapped up in the fictions we tell. When we read Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, we are reading black writers. We are reading African American writers. We are reading gay writers, well, particularly James Baldwin. But I do think it's not helpful to start cordoning off areas of literature based on identity. Literature is meant to be uniting, it's meant to be healing, self-healing, and healing sort of a more global or national wound. It's meant to be bringing us together and helping us understand each other. It's wonderful if men want to read women. And I think a good reading plan will be organically diverse. It's wonderful if women want to read men. It's wonderful if people from England want to read people from China, and if Chinese people want to read Japanese people, if Japanese people want to read people from Jordan. We can go on and on and on. But this modern day fetish, which I believe is running to its end, but that may be optimistic, because definitely many of my critical heroes thought that the battle was lost, and maybe it is lost in the universities, but the fetish of just overtly emphasizing identity. I understand where it comes from. I understand that. I understand that there's a need, a justice-filled need to redress a balance, a historical balance. I get it. I just don't think we're at a stage where if we're going to keep doing this cycling round and round and round, I think we need to break away from that. And I think we need to just tabula rasa. We need to raise it to the ground and start from the base level up. Whatever you look like, whatever your background, if you can bring nuance to the table, if you can bring something that's like really beautifully wrought, something powerful, some powerful literature, if you can bring that, then who cares? Honestly, who cares what you look like or where you're from? Unless it is to do with, for example, the narrative or the characters and a better understanding. We should read widely and deeply, and personally, this overemphasis on what identity we are. Can you see that something like this conversation, it disregards the actual art. It throws it in the trash can. These lists, these laundry lists, and this is why I've not read them out. This article, which is potentially part of the problem, is just list making. Now, it begins like this. Listen to this, all right? Almost all of the buzz in fiction has been around young women. Patricia Lockwood, Yaa Gyasi, Ravan Leilani, Avni Doshi, Lauren Euler. Ask any novelist of any gender, and they'll almost certainly mention Rachel Cusk, Otessa Moshfegh, Rachel Kushner, Gwendolyn Riley, Monique Roffey, Maria Stepanova, Anita Bruckner, Zora Neale Hurston, Natalia Ginsburg, Octavia Butler, Ivy Compton Burnett. On and on it goes, and then it gets to the men. But in the 80s and 90s, we had Martin Amis, Julian Barnes, Ian McEwan, William Boyd, Kazuo Ishiguro et al. In the UK, and Philip Roth, John Updike, and Saul Bellow in the US. Now, what does that tell you? That doesn't tell you anything about these writers. These writers they put a piece of their soul into a work. They hone their craft over years, decades, all this lived experience, all this insight, and they are nothing but a name by virtue of their gender. Are women writers essentially dominating the market at the moment? Yes. I thought a few years ago that there was somewhat of a target on one's back if they so happened to be a straight white male. Suddenly, as Dave Chappelle says in one of his hilarious stand-up routines, he says it's open hunting season. And it seemed a few years ago we were just reading writers based on their identity, and if you look at the prize winners, very often, whilst there are some good ones and not all of them fit into this peg or this category, very often one's politics would determine whether they could even be shortlisted, even be nominated for the prize, let alone if they were to win. It's publishing has become thoroughly politicized at the moment, and identity is the weapon of choice here. I don't understand it. I don't know why something so beautiful has gone this way. It's almost unthinkable if you try to make parallels with any other art form. If you talk about music, if you talk about film, if you talk about painting, sculpture, architecture, this is not, unless anybody is more well versed in these areas than myself, I don't think this is a conversation that those areas are having. I don't think it's a concern in those areas. But for some reason, in the academies, English literature has completely been denigrated. It's been maladapted and perverted and maligned into cultural studies, where they will not read Shakespeare unless they want to damn him. They won't read anybody of particular worth because of their maleness. And this is not me being bitter. I think you can tell I'm not bitter. But hey, potentially I was a few years ago. I kept seeing book clubs springing up that were just like completely focused on just culling male authors, or at least that's what it seemed like. Women's only clubs, the Women's Book Prize, women's book lists, like the Emma Watson book club, where it's like we're just reading women. Fine. Once again, if anybody wants to go to that historical redress the balance thing, you're more than welcome. But all I would say is this is not the criteria for which I choose my books. I think if anybody was to go down my bookshelf or talk to me about books, they would see no unifying thread based on skin colour or gender. They would see a unifying thread based on aesthetic merit. I just think it's a shame. I wouldn't join or promote a male-only club. I wouldn't wish to exclude anybody. And so in this hyper-inclusive time, we've never been more exclusive, and that's not a good thing. I think we should read people based on their merit, and that's what I think about that, to be honest. So, personally, I don't care what your proclivity is. I don't care what you look like or where you're from. Just write something good, and we'll have a chat about it. Thank you very much for that question. I think because you put a smiley at the end of the question, you knew it would be provocative. I hope that was provocative enough. But I can certainly tell you that if you'd asked me that question a few years ago, I probably could have been a little bit more controversial. Let's get into another question. Ideas or suggestions on how to handle a reading slump. I recently just pulled out of an alarming 3-month slump, and would love to know what others do if they experience something like that. Yeah, I've spoken about reading slumps a few times in passing and in sort of dedicated videos and stuff like that. Sometimes a reading slump is aligned with just a general slump in your life. Very often, if you're feeling a bit blue or depressed or glum or things aren't going particularly well for you in your life, then you might not want to read. Some people want to escape into these fictional worlds, and some people, very much when they're feeling blue, do not have the motivation to. So firstly, just do an inventory of your life. Make sure you're eating well and you're exercising. Make sure you've got something that you wake up to, that you're excited about and passionate about each day, something to live for, essentially. Take care of your interpersonal relationships. Take care of your intrapersonal relationship. That's your relationship with yourself and God. Look after yourself, essentially. Now, if you've got all that covered and you're just not in the mood for reading, then you might want to take an inventory and look at what are you reading. What are the books? Are you reading some of those pesky little prize winners that seem to only include people based on their political orientation? Then of course you're going to go into a reading slump. I did. That's why I stopped reading the prize winners, because it was all overtly politicized and there was an undercurrent of hate towards people who look like me. And there's only so much you can take of that. I will not accept anybody making me feel guilty about the station in life in which I was born. Full stop. And I would not do it to anybody else. We're all about promoting each other lovingly, building each other up. And I don't think some of these books, I don't think they're written by people who want the best for the world. I think they just want to watch it burn, like Joker. Are you reading books like that? I've not been in a slump for a while for reading because I'm just reading too many damn good books. And you kind of already know what those damn good books are. If you look at the Hardcore Literature Book Club reading schedule, they're all picked because they're great books. What makes a great book? Well, we can go on and on and on to define what makes a great book, but essentially, do you want to reread it? And every time you reread it, do you get more out of it? How much can you discuss in regards to the book? These are great books. My antidote to reading slumps would look like Tolstoy, it would look like Dickens, it would look like Austen, it would look like Shakespeare, it would look like Dostoevsky. Go back to the classics, and I think that might bust you out of a reading slump. Also, slow down. Very often reading slumps come from kind of reading burnout, where people are trying to tick off these massive long book bucket lists and TBR reads. I read 30 books this month, and I can log it on my Goodreads. Man, come on, did you really read them? If so, did you enjoy them? I know some people are very, very fast. I'm not that fast. I have a pretty fast reading speed. I can't read that fast. I think if you're just trying to get through these books, you're not enjoying them. So slow down, read the good books, forget about books you think you should read or you're being guilted into reading, and maybe check out the schedule for the Hardcore Literature Book Club and pick one of those books because they're really good ones. Let's thank you for the question. That was a really nice question. Let's get into another one. This is a nice one. Do you think reading should always be a serious activity? Is it really necessary to read great works all the time, or is it okay to enjoy feel-good popular literature? And what defines a great work? That's a great question. Okay, should reading always be a serious activity? I think it should be a bit like work. I think you should work at it. And there is something known as the reader's sublime. That's a Harold Bloom quote. The reader's sublime. That's the search for a difficult pleasure. It's like the runner's high. I mean, if somebody asked you, should climbing mountains always be a serious activity? What would you say? You'd think, well, it's you got to take it seriously because it's difficult and you don't want to mess up and you want to do it right, but you also want to enjoy it, don't you? You want to enjoy the process and the journey, you want to enjoy the summit, and you want the experience, and then you want to be able to reflect on the experience. So it's a bit of both, and I think there shouldn't be a complete division between what you do for fun and what you do for work. Try and bring them together. We've lost the art of traditional scholarship. Traditional scholarship means you're not necessarily just in a school. Your traditional scholarship is self-directed reading and self-learning, like learning another language, learning to play chess. It's something quite pleasurable, at least to me, when I figure out puzzles, for example, or something clicks in a book. So I think, yeah, it pretty much should be serious, and you should take it serious, but you should also enjoy it as well. Is it necessary to read great works all the time? Absolutely not. I pretty much almost always read great works, but not completely. And this is only a shift that's happened over the last year or so. But I definitely do like some frivolous, light, escapist fiction. I really do. I'm collecting the original first editions of James Bond, Dr. No, Diamonds Are Forever, Casino Royale. These are fun books. Agatha Christie, Poirot. These are fun books. Some people like Stephen King, for example. Some people like Dan Brown. I took Dan Brown's masterclass. Great guy, and he can tell a story. That can't be denied. I think. Don't worry too much. This is kind of affixing onto the last question. Don't worry too much about what you should read. I'm definitely not a snob who looks down on this popular fiction. I think it's great. Some of the stories that are available to us that are not great literature, I'm thankful for them. Sometimes you just want a really good read, and I'm thankful for those writers who provide that. And I think they're doing a really good service. I remember when my nan died, and we went to her house to clear out all her stuff, basically box it all up. And the thing that really struck me was that she had a novel splayed open, cover down, maybe 250-ish pages into the novel, so she hadn't finished it. I think it was Nora Roberts, something like that. And that really hurt to see that, because because I realised that was potentially giving her comfort towards the end. She died of cancer. It hurt me because I realised, she wouldn't know the ending of the story. And then the relief sort of came when I thought, well, that doesn't really matter, because perhaps she would have had some distraction, some escapism. There's a lot of people who are in hospital who are so thankful for a stack of good reads, good, fun stories. So no, absolutely not. I think read what you like. If that just so happens to be some of the classics, then lucky you. But you know what? It's great whatever you want to read. So I'm all for reading in pretty much all of its manifestations. And very briefly, your last question, what defines a great work? This could be a whole podcast unto itself. Ezra Pound said that great literature is language charged with meaning to the utmost possible degree. I think great literature is something that can be reread and something that strikes a chord or explores some facet of the human condition in new and disorienting ways. Great literature can be sort of strange or estranging, or it can be hyper familiar. It can be a real slice of a world that you know that is not your world. I think that will do it for a definition of great literature. I think a lot comes under that one. Thank you very much for the question. And here's another question from someone who looks like, is that Japanese? Okay, cool. That's really cool. If I've got Japanese literatures, I'll be very thankful. Yoroshiku onegaishimasu, minasan. This question is, I'm a huge book lover, but recently I sort of doubt my way of reading. I think I'm just looking for what I want to hear in the books. I'm not sure if I'm really intending to listen to what the writers want to convey. I may not be truly a good reader. I might just be an egocentric reader. This thought is making me so sad. What do you think? That's a really nice question. I think the fact that you've picked up on it really tells you something. You can't be a bad reader. That's a really nuanced question. That's a very thoughtful question. That's a very self-reflective question. And I think you probably are a very good reader. So you think you're just looking for what you want to hear in the books. What do you want to hear? Because actually, very often, you kind of want to go into these books with questions. Like what's going on in your life right now. When you read Dostoevsky, when you read Tolstoy, you might have a few questions that you want answers to. And these books can very much, as a vicarious lived experience, can help us answer those questions. Try your best not to shy away from something that might oppose your worldview. Another thing about reading is it's us talking to ourselves. Good reading helps us talk to ourselves better, and it helps us talk to other people better, because all talk is essentially self-talk. So when we're talking with a writer and reading their work is talking with them. When you read Anna Karenina, you're essentially sitting down with Tolstoy. He's giving you a piece of himself. You're talking to yourself, and that's really useful. I think you're probably a better reader than you give yourself credit to, but I think you might also find it useful to know this Stephen Covey piece of advice, and that is, this is a principle from which to orient your life. Seek first to understand, then seek to be understood. This is very, very difficult, but essentially this is the art of conversation. Very often when people are listening to other people, they're not truly listening, are they? They're just waiting for their turn to say something, and there's thoughts running in their head, and maybe they have something interesting to say based on something in response to the other person. And then the other person keeps talking, and you are now no longer listening. You're just thinking about that thing that you want to say that's really, really good. And there's a lot of freedom in shedding the ego and just saying, you know what? Regardless of how amazing that thing is that I want to say, that can wait. And just truly engaging and listening. What happens when you do that? Well, you might forget that thing that you wanted to say, but it might also become irrelevant. The other person will notice that you're listening attentively, and there'll be a stillness there. That's good communication, is essentially listening. And you might get to the end. Someone might get to the end of what they're saying and you have nothing to offer them. Very often people will just keep talking. Once you truly understand what somebody's saying, then you can form a response. So when you're reading these books, it's a mindfulness technique, really, isn't it? It's just trying to quiet the inner voice and just sort of acknowledging where is your mind wandering, yeah? And without judgment, just nudging back gradually to what's before you, coming back to the sentence or the paragraph, coming back to the page. It's just, you need to be self-loving with this. You need to suspend judgment, and it's a practice, and it's just something that you get better at. And that's one of the great things about reading. That's very much a tool that you will continue to sharpen. So I think you're on the right track, so don't worry too much about that. Thank you very much for the question. And the next question: if one wants to get into the world of serious literature, where should he start with? Well, this sounds like a plug, but it's not really. I would highly recommend you start with the Hardcore Literature Book Club. There has been a lot of planning that's gone into not just the choice of the books that we read, but the lectures. At time of recording, we've got maybe 60 or 70 long-form lectures. By long-form, I mean like hour-long videos. We've got tons of those about the great books, and we've picked some books that people typically find really difficult to get into, but the result has been staggering. We picked Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Many people struggle to get past the first few pages of that, but the book club group has unanimously fallen in love with that book. They're absolutely, it's become so many people's favourite book, and people have found the reading experience actually quite easy. So I'd suggest checking out the schedule. Any of the books on the schedule will be a great place for you to start. Maybe you can Google some summaries and find out what they're all about and see which one you're kind of drawn to. Like on the list at the moment, we've got Anna Karenina, we've got Crime and Punishment, Les Miserables, Don Quixote. I would suggest just spending some time, maybe put some nice music on, have a nice drink. Look at the Wikipedias or whatever, look at what people are saying about those books, and then think, which one do you want to try your hand at? And then just grab it, either get a copy from your library or order one online and give it a go. And trust yourself that you're smart enough to come to those books, because you very much are. They might be difficult, but they're definitely not beyond your comprehension, and I think you'll get a lot out of them. So that's where I would start. Those are some good places to start. And thank you for the question. Okay, we've got another question. Hey Benjamin, I'm trying to get into modernist literature but having a bit of trouble. Do you have any book recommendations or tips that might help a beginner understand modernist type stuff better? Thanks. That's interesting. Okay, so we're talking modernist rather than postmodernist. I would define modern as anything from turn of the century, so 1900 up until 1960 or 1965. Postmodern is after 1965. So Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian would essentially be postmodern. But when you hear the word postmodern, you think it's going to be really difficult and beyond your comprehension and experimental. Blood Meridian's actually, it's not too difficult with the style. The topic matter is difficult. It is a bloodthirsty book. It's brutal, it's uncomfortable to read, but it is very, very rewarding. So maybe Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. If you're talking actual modernist stuff, I suppose you might be alluding to James Joyce, Ulysses, or maybe some of Virginia Woolf's stuff. Ulysses is a book that we're going to do with the book club next year, because we're going to do a modernist year, although we have got an introduction to modernist short stories coming in the next couple of months, where we're going to look at D.H. Lawrence, we'll look at Dennis Johnson, we'll look at Flannery O'Connor, who else will we look at? Shirley Jackson, those sort of writers. Ulysses is the type of book that you probably need a companion to get through. I think there's a lot of these big books where you could really benefit from somebody holding your hand and taking you through it. And some of these modernist books really do ask a lot of the reader. They demand so much. So many people, myself included, have thrown Ulysses across the room and vowed never to pick it up again, because it's so steeped in illusion. You need to know quite a bit about classical literature and so many sort of esoteric areas to comprehend it. So you might need a guide. There are guides in book form that can help you through. If you're talking about Proust, In Search of Lost Time, I suppose he'd be modernist, wouldn't he? There are plenty of guides that will help you through. Roger Shattuck has one. We're currently doing the Proust project, or we're about to kick it off in the Hardcore Literature Book Club. I've put some dedicated videos out on how to read Proust. It's hard because each and every writer, they need their own sort of tool set to appreciate them. So how to read Proust and how to read James Joyce are different conversations. They don't have any cross-influence, I don't think. They met once briefly and didn't even talk about books. They are so different to read, and they're both difficult, but they also both have very real pleasures to them, but they're very, very different. So where would I start? I wouldn't start with Ulysses for modernist stuff. If we're including the postmodernists in the modernist umbrella, then maybe Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian, or The Road would be good. What else would be good? I'd say Hemingway is kind of like the daddy or the papa, the father of modernism. Again, he's very different. He's going to be very, very different from Proust. Proust is very long, winding sentences that stretch on for pages and pages, and Hemingway is just short, stripped of emotion. I wouldn't recommend his novels, funnily enough. I think he's a better short story writer. We have a podcast that reads where we read some of Hemingway's short stories together. Maybe listen to that, read the short stories from Hemingway, and then listen through the podcast would be a good place to start. Who else do you have? You have William Faulkner, of course. If you're going to talk about Hemingway, you might talk about Faulkner. As I Lay Dying, Absalom. Again, difficult. Some stream of consciousness stuff. They're doing very interesting things with perspective, many of these modernist writers. You will probably need some guides to help you through, certainly with Faulkner. And, don't get me started on the poets. There are so many difficult modernist poets like E. Cummings, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, steeped in illusion. I think Hemingway might be the most approachable an easy to digest modern writer that I can think of at the moment. Perhaps if you're a beginner approaching modernist fiction for the first time, I'd recommend getting into the short stories. Short stories are easy to digest, or easier than big fat pieces of fiction. There's a really nice anthology called A Glimpse of Truth, something like that. And it has a lot of modernist short stories in there. D.H. Lawrence, The Rocking Horse Winner, is in there. Shirley Jackson, The Lottery, is in there. Dennis Johnson, Emergency, is in there. Flannery O'Connor, A Good Man Is Hard to Find, and some Hemingway. And just, go through the little modernist short stories. They probably will only take you 20, 30 minutes. And then you can get a good sense of which direction you might want to go in from there. So that would be my recommendation. So thank you very much for your question. That was a good one. Now we have another question. Please talk about your hero, Harold Bloom. Yeah, Harold Bloom. I feel sad, probably on a weekly basis, that I will never get to meet him. I have a really kooky belief that people are, if people think this is crazy, that's completely understandable. I read an Emily Dickinson poem at the precise moment, I believe. It was definitely the same day and around the same time, but I don't think it was around the precise moment that he died. And I didn't know about him at that time. I had, of course, come to his critical commentaries in Oxford, but I didn't really know who he was. I hadn't read any of his books, and I didn't really know his whole philosophy and approach. But I read it at that time, and I remember there was something weird. There was a weird sort of feeling. I was reading Had This One Day Not Been by Emily Dickinson, which I would think, although I've not seen this anywhere, and nobody talks about this poem, I think that might have been one of Bloom's favourites that he hadn't spoken about, or maybe he liked it. Either way, if you've ever had anything die in your arms, which I unfortunately have, when someone or something dies near you, you can feel the soul departing the body. Now, atheists will say, no, you can't, and they'll give you a load of reasons why that's not the case. That's fine. That's just my personal belief. I believe you can. I believe in energy transfer. I believe that we do have a soul, and I think at that time, his soul departed, and I believe he passed his torch onto me, his critical torch. That's what I believe. And so what I'm doing, in a sense, is just extending the tradition that he wrote. He was writing in the tradition of Samuel Johnson, William Hazlitt, Harold Goddard, and I would like to think that when I get to the end of my life, I would have also added something to that tradition. So that's what I have to say about him. He was unfairly attacked a few times in his life because of what he called the school of resentment. I call it the literary pretensia. The school of resentment. People who read books only through their sort of narrow ideological identity-based lens. Marxists, neo-feminists, and so on. They strip all the joy, they suck the joy out of literature. They don't like literature. I encountered plenty of these at Oxford, and it made me hate my subject. They just want to break everything down. They just want to reduce everybody to their identity and their context, and they just want to damn people. Reading Shakespeare for these people is not a pleasurable experience in appreciating, truthful evocations of character and nuanced thought regarding the human condition. They just want to damn him because of whatever ist of the day is trending, and I don't think that's a very loving way to approach literature. And I think a lot of people would agree with that, seeing as the podcast is relatively popular at this point, and Bloom himself had somewhat of a large fan base, and so Bloom was writing in reaction against that school of thought, essentially. His books are great. I would really, really highly recommend any you can get your hands on. You could try How to Read a Book and Why. You could try the Western Canon. What else is good? I'm just going to look at my bookshelf and see. You could get his Anxiety of Influence. That's a really key Bloomian idea. And also The Bright Book of Life is really, really nice. Anything, basically. Just pick up one of his works and enjoy. If you like some of my stuff, then you'll like Bloom, because he's very much an inspiration for me. So thanks for the prompt. I love talking about Bloom. Now we have a question from a Patreon, Florian. Dear Benjamin, thank you for inviting questions. He says, I know you've read and enjoyed authors whose maternal language is German. Jung, Nietzsche, Rilke, Freud. Have you ever read something from the following? Thomas Mann, Heinrich Mann, Johann Wolfgang Goethe, Stefan Georg, or George, would you pronounce it? Max Frisch, Adolf Muschg. Have a great day. Thank you for the question. I love Jung. I love Nietzsche. Love Rilke. Love Freud. Thomas Mann. I tried to read some of his stuff actually in German when I was learning German, but this is a very, very long time ago now, and since then I haven't really. So Mann is one of my literary blind spots. Heinrich Mann, no, I haven't. Johann Wolfgang Goethe, I have. Roger Shattuck said that Proust was oceanic. I feel like Goethe is oceanic. I suppose he's probably Germany's Shakespeare. I've never really fully got into him. I remember enjoying The Sorrows of Young Werther. Funnily enough, when that came out initially, there was a boom of copycat suicides. Interesting. Some of his poetry is good. Faust, I need to go back to Faust. It's something that I've sort of earmarked for the future. I do earmark these great writers and these books. And Goethe's Faust, I mean, I read it as part of my degree, but it's been a long time. So essentially, for all intents and purposes, no, I haven't really read much Goethe. And the others, leider nicht. No, I haven't, unfortunately. So I should get back into that. I've read a fair bit of writers whose first language is German, but I also do feel like German literature is becoming a blind spot, and then there's a lot there that I probably need to get deeper into. So thank you for the question. And here's a question from Christian. Hi Ben, would love to know if you have any go-to light reads in between more demanding novels. If you have any to share, I'd be interested to know which ones or any particular author. Mine are P.G. Wodehouse and Agatha Christie. I find these to be a wonderful palate cleanser. Wow, that's an interesting coincidence, because I ordered some of both of those recently. Agatha Christie, recently read the ABC Murders, which was fun. And P.G. Wodehouse, definitely, he's hilarious. It's anything by Wodehouse is a good shout. Who else could I recommend? I suppose if you like Wodehouse, you might want to give Tom Sharp a go. I haven't read him for a very long time, but he's very much like Woodhouseian. He's writing in that sort of tradition. A light read, I read The Silence of the Lambs in between, to break up Anna Karenina. Going back to it, I found it didn't really hold up for a reread. As I think I mentioned earlier, I've been collecting the James Bond novels. They're good fun. Detective stuff, Raymond Chandler is good fun. Would you consider Murakami a light read? I'm not sure. But yeah, definitely the two that you mentioned, funnily enough. And the funny thing about those two is they're light reads and they're palate cleansers, but they're also just really good. Like, they're definitely, it's not like frivolous literature. It's just a good read, and it's easy. So yeah, I would agree. I would actually just agree with both of those choices. So thank you for the question. Now we've got another question. I am interested about speed reading because I read all my books at a slow pace and I don't really know how to read faster. Yeah, speed reading. Okay, there's a good course by Mind Valley. I did a review. I think if you type in Mind Valley speed reading and my name, Benjamin McAvoy, you'll see my course. I managed to get my reading speed up from I think it was 200 words per minute, which is average, to well over 500 with comprehension, which is a significant difference. Speed reading has its utility. You don't want to speed read Proust, for example. You don't want to speed read great literature. Slowing down is a good thing. But it's definitely good to have that gear, have that ability to go up a gear if you want. And what I found was sometimes you need to go slow to go fast, but very often if you know how to speed read, your baseline increases. So when you do want to slow down, your slower baseline is faster. So it has utility. So I would recommend the Mind Valley speed reading course. If you want me to give recommendations specifically at some point, I can definitely do that. But for now, I would recommend checking out that course. And I've got a review for it, so go check that out if you're interested. Okay, next question. What got you into the works of Nietzsche and Schopenhauer at a young age? Is there any advice you can share for younger people that also enjoy studying philosophy but don't have friends to discuss ideas with? Yeah, that was me. I remember feeling really alienated with my friend group, and I actually lost some friends because I was reading philosophy. I was reading Nietzsche and I was reading Camus. I remember very vividly, I think I was maybe 14 or 15, probably 14. I was reading Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus, and I was lying on the grass and my mates were talking, maybe kicking a football about, and I remember that I tried to talk to them about the book, and I still remember the blank stares, but I remember interpreting it at the time that they just didn't like me. And I just didn't have anybody to talk to. It was only when I got to university that I suddenly could talk to people, but then I had the opposite problem because I felt out of my depth, which is why those experiences led me to want to create the Hardcore Literature Book Club, which is filled with tons of great people with really nuanced ideas. Everybody's from all sorts of backgrounds. It's really warm and accepting. We all have great ideas, and I think that's my top recommendation. If you don't have friends to discuss your ideas with, you have an instant friendship group filled with readers right there. And I'll welcome you today if you join up. It's at patreon.com/hardcore literature. What got me into the works of Nietzsche and Schopenhauer? Good question. I think for Nietzsche specifically, I was a big fan of Jim Morrison from The Doors, and I know that he liked Nietzsche. So I was just reading what my rock star hero liked, and then I got really into it, and specifically The Birth of Tragedy. I used some of those ideas in my personal statement and talked about it at interview, so it helped me get into Oxford. Schopenhauer. I remember reading Schopenhauer in a religious education class. I went to a really bad school, and everybody was smacking each other in the class and screaming and shouting. Nobody was doing any work. And I remember sitting there, I was like, well, if the teacher's not going to teach, I'm going to read my book. So I opened Schopenhauer, and the teacher went mental. She said, "What are you doing?" And I said, well, no one's listening, no one's behaving. She goes, well, if you set an example for everybody, maybe they would. And she screamed at me and told me to get out of the class. I was just like, what on earth? So I don't really like Schopenhauer, I must say. I do like Nietzsche. So another thing you can can do if you want to, get better at discussing these ideas is get better at refining your own thoughts. So have you got a journal that you can write into? And when you're reading these books, slow down, take some notes, circle things, underline, and then try to pick apart their argument and just write on paper, basically. We don't know what we think about a subject until we write about it or until we talk about it. So just, keep writing, and that should help refine your thoughts, and you'll get a lot more out of these works of philosophy. Great question. Thank you for asking. Next question. On a first reading, should one seek deep understanding, or should one pace through the book? Then on the reread, can he or she try to thoroughly understand what is actually being said? I think you've already kind of hit upon something that's really important, is the fact that you're assuming that there's a reread, which is amazing. Most people don't. Most people think there's a one-off read, and that's it. And that's not the case. If you definitely are planning to reread it, then you can be a bit more lax with the first reading. You can go through it enjoyably. Maybe you don't even make any notes. Maybe you don't circle anything. Just have a good time. Bring yourself to the book. And then when you reread, then you've got your pen. And then you're going to be picking things apart. So when you go through, maybe you'll just file away some ideas in your mind. And you'll think, that's interesting. And then keep reading the book. And then if it really is interesting and it does stick out to you, you will find it again when you go through it. If it's not, maybe you'll miss it, but that's fine. So it's kind of whatever remains with you by the end of the book, and you're going to go back and find it. So I think that's a good technique. But of course, should one seek deep understanding? Very often we don't get what we seek until we stop seeking for it. So perhaps you might want to just immerse yourself and let what happens. On the other end, you've got that biblical quote, haven't you? Knock and the door shall be answered. Seek and ye shall find. So maybe you do want to seek deep understanding. Set your intention before the book and tell yourself, I really want to get something out of this book. I want to really understand it. So you've got this difficult book before you. Tell yourself as you're reading it, I'm going to read this carefully, with care. I'm going to enjoy it. And if I don't understand anything, I'm going to pause. Maybe I'll look something up. Maybe I'll read it out loud. Maybe I'll talk to somebody about this. But I'm going to dedicate myself to this book, and I'm going to give it my honest effort. And I think if you approach a book like that, well, firstly, what a compliment to the author. But secondly, you absolutely will get some understanding out of it. I promise you that. And great question. Thank you so much for asking. Okay, next question. Why don't you read or review modern books? For example, Stephen King's. I mean, you only talk about classic books. Why don't you talk about modern books? I think I do. I definitely do read modern books. Depends what you're talking about. I mean, you've mentioned Stephen King. I've read almost everything. Not absolutely everything, but I'd say probably 80% of what Stephen King put out. When I was younger, I voraciously inhaled Stephen King, and I was going to do a reading challenge where I read everything that Stephen King wrote in chronological order. So you'd be starting with Carrie, and you'd be going through. He's got some great stories. Stephen King's imagination is wonderful. The Shining, Misery. We could go on and on. Stand, It, Salem's Lot. There's loads. He's definitely got an imagination on him. What I noticed is about this time last year, I was in lockdown, and I wanted to read The Green Mile in original serialized publication. So what King did is he published The Green Mile. He chopped it up into bits, and he would publish one part per month. And I think he did this for about 5 or 6 months. So I got the original publications, the actual original split up little books. They're beautiful, with pictures and stuff. And I was going to read it, and I was going to read it aloud. And I found, and I know this is going to sound snobbish, and I can't help it, but it's just me being truthful. I found that his sentence construction was really hard. I found it really hard to wrangle with, and I'd been reading a lot of Tolstoy, Shakespeare, Chekhov. I've been reading a lot of really good classic writers, and so it really put it in stark contrast that though I love him as a storyteller and I think he's got a great imagination, his actual writing style can be a bit jarring when you've been reading a lot of like higher literature. I've got endless respect for him. His book on writing is tremendously influential for so many writers. Really, really good stuff. So he's a great storyteller. It's just probably not my area of over interest, and I don't know how much I can add to that conversation. If I did talk more about Stephen King, it would turn into, maybe we'd talk about horror and the tradition of horror, but we'd always end up going back to the classics. Turn of the Screw, we'd look at ghost stories, Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, we'll look at the Bram Stoker's Dracula, we'd look at the tradition that King came from, and it'd be really interesting. But I don't know if it's my overt interest at this time. I follow my passion with my reading and with everything, and what I'm passionate about right now is just like the Romantic poets, Shakespeare, reading all of Austen, reading all of Dickens. There's so many great writers out there. Dickens was endlessly influential when it came to Stephen King. So just reading these great writers and reading the writers that storytellers like King relished and who they grew up on is really exciting for me. But I do mention them. I've spoken quite a bit about modern writers. I think I've spoken about Silence of the Lambs. That's Thomas Harris. We've spoken about maybe David Foster Wallace a little bit. I've mentioned Murakami, and we're going to have a Murakami podcast coming out soon. We'll probably talk about Kafka on the Shore. Who else? Yeah, Cormac McCarthy, as I just said, Blood Meridian is amazing. I'm going to teach that book next year, and we'll do a podcast over the next couple of months. Who else is modern? Don DeLillo. I'm just looking at my bookshelf now. There's loads. I mean, I'm definitely not averse to a little bit of modernism. In fact, I like it. I think what you're talking about is more like pulp, like frivolous stuff. And I've read all those books. I really have. Lee Child, I've read all the Jack Reachers, or most of them. Read all the Stephen King, loved Dan Brown's, all that sort of thing. But at this moment in my life, I'm just not reading them. Will I come back to them? Yeah, probably. Yeah. And at that point, we'll probably talk about them. So that's my answer to that. Thank you very much for the question. I like that one. Okay, next question. What are your thoughts on philosophical pessimism? My thoughts are that those philosophers that are designated as pessimists, I don't think all of them are. Now, Schopenhauer, I think, is. I don't think Nietzsche is. Am I the only person that reads Friedrich Nietzsche, like, in a positive vein? Don't know, probably not. I find him endlessly positive despite his biographical features. I think what he's saying is empowering. I'm a positive person, so actually the nihilistic stuff, and this was a problem when we read Crime and Punishment with the book club, is the reason I don't like I do like Dostoevsky, I just find him difficult to get on with, is because he's nihilistic. The whole God is dead, which is a Nietzschean dictum which people have taken and run with, and I think not fully comprehended the meaning of that. I like positive psychology and positive psychology. I like Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies your freedom to choose. Man's Search for Meaning. I like Rilke. I like Ernest Becker. I like Nathaniel Branden. We can go on, but I like positive psychology. Pessimism, I can be gloomy sometimes. My temperament can predispose me to a little bit of melancholy here and there, or maybe a lot of melancholy, but ultimately I like to be positive. And I like to, and there is a religious, not religious, that's the wrong word because I'm not religious, but there is a spiritual essence there. And I think a lot of these pessimistic philosophers just don't have a sense of God, and hand in hand with that is there's no sense of meaning. And I do think there's a higher power, and I very much like to live my life in that vein, in that belief. And so my thoughts on pessimistic philosophy. It's okay, there's some good stuff in there, some fun reads, but ultimately as a life outlook, I like practical positivity. And thank you very much for the question. Nice one. And I think we're going to end on this one. They're still coming in, so if I do miss your question, I'm sorry, but we'll get to it in another show, and that'll be fun. I think it's great that there's been so many cool questions, so thank you everybody. This question is, are there any booktubers or YouTube channels similar to yours that you watch and would recommend? And there's that smiley face which tells me everything. You know what I'm going to say. No, I'm sorry. I can't think of anybody just offhand. For the booktube, world. I just don't know what most of them are doing. They don't really seem to like books, and it's not like subject choice. I don't mind YA because they're typically talking about YA. I don't mind that, and if people want to talk about prize winners, that's fine. I've never seen a channel that actually talks about the books. I am not doubting that there are some. I know there must be. I can't be the only person who's doing that. But the main big booktubers, they don't say very much. They do a lot of book hauls, and they just show off tons of books and look at the covers, and then they never read them. And it's quite loud. It's very contrary to my natural temperament. It's too extroverted. I'm very introverted. So I can't think of any offhand. What's interesting is I've had a few friends start watching my stuff, my YouTube, and listening to the podcast, which is lovely. Friends and family, actually. And one of my good friends, one of my best friends, he said, actually, let me pull up the text. He sent a screenshot of my video. He's been watching my videos. He sent a screenshot, and then he showed what gets recommended. He says, and I'm gonna swear because this is what he said. Bro, the fucking trash that YouTube recommends once you start watching your vids. Jeez. Yeah, and I mean I know what he's talking about. It's who'd have thought that a niche in which you're talking about books and literature and all that wouldn't have very much actual discussion about books and literature? So I can't think of any. If you know anybody, hook me up. Show me some other people who are doing the same thing. I'd love to hear that. As for other just YouTube channels, if you want YouTube channels, I quite like PewDiePie. I think PewDiePie is funny. I don't watch his gaming stuff, but he does a collab with is his name Ken? He's got glasses, he's got a beard. That's always really funny. I like that they'll watch something like a TV program together and react. I'd like to do stuff like that. I think that'd be quite funny. I'd like to do the sort of bookish version of that, and we're actually doing that in the book club. We're going to do a watch along, and we're going to watch different productions of Anna Karenina, Crime and Punishment, Persuasion, and we're going to do it sort of live and react in real time, which should be fun. Who else is good? I respect the hustle for YouTubers like Zoella, she's a British YouTuber. She does like makeup videos and stuff like that. So there's some good stuff on YouTube. There's definitely some, like, the production value of some of these YouTube channels is insane. I don't think anybody who's starting out with this sort of thing should measure themselves or compare themselves with somebody who's like today but has already done years and years of the work, but it's certainly, there's some really good. I like what's his name, Abroad in Japan. I don't watch a ton of YouTube, I must say, but when I was living in Japan, I watched him. He was very funny, and he's an example of good production value. He started with like webcam videos, and now he's got like millions of subs, and he does like proper documentaries, and it's really impressive. Wim Hof is good. If you know Wim Hof, he does all the breathing. I found out about Wim Hof in like 2015, and I don't think anybody knew who he was. And then I started trying to promote his stuff, his breathing, his ice therapy, and now he's got like millions of subscribers, and he fully deserves them. And I think we'll leave it there. There's been a ton of great questions today. Thank you all so much. I'm endlessly grateful for you. And if you could navigate over to iTunes and leave a good review for the Hardcore Literature Podcast, I would really appreciate you. Thank you all again so much. We'll definitely do another one of these because this was a lot of fun, and I want to wish you a lovely day and happy reading.